Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I see that we have 56 participants so far, so I'm gonna get still wait for a minute before we officially welcome you all to these webinars that is titled Beyond Publication Strategies for Successful Standards Adoption. So I see now that we are 1 minute past the hour. So I will officially start the webinar and welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining this webinar. We hope that you will stay with us for these 90 minutes that we have planned, where we have a full agenda. We will have some opening remarks, both from IFAN President and SES President, and then myself, as I am the moderator for the session, I'll introduce more in detail the panel discussion as well as the panelists, and we will, of course, have ample time to take questions, as there will be a Q&A session, and we will, of course, prioritize those questions that are asked by the audience, and then we will come to an end. So without any further ado, first of all, what I would like to do, for those that you just joined, welcome again to this webinar. That is a joint webinar between IFAN and SES. And it is for that reason that I will, without any further ado, give the floor to the IFAN President, Berit Oren, first of all, for some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Berit Oren, and I'm IFAN's president. It is an absolute honor to welcome you all on behalf of IFAN to this joint SES and IFAN webinar. Before we dive into today's incredibly important topic, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the brilliant team who organized this session. In particular, I want to thank our initiator, Muhammad Ali, for his incredible vision and dedication in bringing this event to life. I also want to express our gratitude to our wonderful moderator, Mercedes Mayra Costa, and our distinguished panel of global speakers who are lending us their time and expertise today. And finally, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today, and I hope you'll have a good day. For those of you who might be meeting us for the first time, allow me to briefly introduce IFAN. We are the International Federation of Standards Users, and for over 50 years, we are proudly served as the global voice of standard users. While standard developing organizations focus on the writing of publication of standards, IFAN focuses entirely on the practical side, on the organization and professionals who actually implement, use, and live by these standards every single day. We are an incredibly active global community. Throughout the year, we host a wide array of activities, from interactive workshops to insightful webinars, just like this one. We also produce a fantastic podcast where we dive into real-world standardization challenges and successes. If you haven't listened to it yet, I highly invite you to listen to our podcast, which is called The Voice of Standard Users. It is a fantastic resource for anyone looking to navigate the complex world of standard implementation. Today's topic hits right at the heart of what IFAN stands for. True success isn't just achieved when a standard is published. It's accomplished when organizations actually apply it to drive innovation, compliance, and market growth. So if you believe in that mission, we want you to be part of our journey. I warmly invite you to join the IFAN community. Please visit our website and follow our LinkedIn page to learn more about our network, access, and resources. Without further ado, I'm thrilled to hand the virtual floor to our moderator, Mercedes, to kick off what promises to be deeply insightful discussion. Thank you all and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much for these welcoming remarks and for setting the tone for today's session. And now I would like to hand it over to Carrie, who is the SES president, also for some welcoming remarks. Carrie, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Carrie Harrison. I'm president of SES, the Society for Standardization Professionals, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you today and really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. I know it's summertime and many are in the midst of their vacations and holidays, and it just definitely demonstrates your commitment to advancing practice and the impact of standardization. SES at its core exists to support the standardization professionals at every stage of their career, their education, professional development, certification, and a vibrant global community. Today's webinar is, of course, massively reflective of that mission, focusing on the important question of how do we ensure that standards create value beyond publication. I don't need to tell this audience that while publishing a standard is an important milestone, it's only the beginning, and the true value of standards is realized when they're understood, adopted, and implemented to drive innovation. They need to improve interoperability, strengthen trust, and solve real-world problems, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion that'll explore those practical strategies for making it happen. I want to thank our partners at IFAN, our speakers for their expertise, and again, all of you for taking your time to participate. So with that, thank you again. I hope you enjoy the webinar, and I hope to see you at another event soon.
So thank you so much also, Carrie, for these welcoming remarks. And I will now move it on after both Carrie and Barrett set the scene for our discussion. And I will start by sharing my screen here, as I would like to, before I start talking about the topic of the session today, although both Barry and Carrie already reflected on it and introduced also the panelists that we have today, that I will just do a brief introduction, but they will introduce themselves afterwards. So as it was alluded in the welcoming remarks, today we are talking about what happens after a standard it gets published and what are those strategies for the successful adoption of standards, right? I think both in the welcoming remarks, Carrie and Barrett said that sometimes we measure the success when the standard is published. This happens especially when we are involved in the technical committees or groups that are developing the standards, that we see the publication of the standard as the milestone, right? But as it was mentioned, like standards create value only when they are effectively adopted and implemented. So during this panel session with these distinguished panelists that we have today, what we will do is to try to explore like what are the strategies and practical tools for driving the adoption of voluntary standards, both within organizations and across industries. So during this session, what we will walk you through is different communication techniques, stakeholder engagement models, and real case studies that highlight the successful implementation of standards. So at the end of the session, we are aiming that you will gain insights into overcoming common adoption barriers and learn how standards can be leveraged to enhance innovation, to support compliance, but as well as to improve market access and remove barriers. So for doing that, as I said, we have a very distinguished panelist, which combines people coming from standards development organizations, but also from government, as well as from industry. And before introducing the panelists, although Barrett already introduced myself, I would like to also introduce me, as I will be the moderator for this session. So my name is Mercedes Miracosta. I work as a standards strategy and policy lead at HP. And as I said, today I have the pleasure of moderating this session. So with me today to have this discussion where we will explore all these topics, we have Katerina Kuperna, who is the Manager, Technical Committee Operations at ASTM International. We have Tony Holland, who is the Technical Relations Manager at IBM. We have Elise Owen, who works at the US Environmental Protection Agency as a standards executive. And we also have Giovanni Collot, who is the Public Relations Manager at CEN and CENELEC. So without any further ado, I would like to invite, first of all, Katerina. For now, what we would like to do is just give a brief introduction of everybody in the panel, and then the panelists will have the time to make some introductory remarks. And just to warm you up, the audience, please be aware that after each of the panel, the speakers, we will take one or two questions if there are questions from the audience. And once everybody makes their introductory remarks, we will take additional questions from the audience. So please don't be shy and use the Q&A to raise your questions as they come up through the session, as we are aiming at answering as many questions as possible and make this session as interactive as possible. So now, without any further ado, Katerina, I would like to hand it over to you for a brief introduction.
Great. Thank you, Mercedes. And thank you to IFAN and SES for hosting this discussion today. As mentioned, my name is Katerina Kuperna. I work for ASTM International as a manager with our technical committees. I currently manage 5 committees, ranging from our commercial space group to data in the digital supply chain to our amusement ride group. And I also have our soil and rock committee, which has many geotechnical standards that are embedded into international building codes. And then my final committee is polishes. So I have a wide range of experience with different industries and technical committees working directly with them on the development and use of the standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina. And we'll hand it over now to Tony.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be here on this panel and everybody who's managed to establish it and get it going for us today. So I'm Tony Holland. I work from the UK. I'm the Technical Relations Manager based in the UK for IBM. We have other national representatives as well. I'm just the UK person, but we work at an international level. And because I'm from IBM, I am here as an industry stakeholder. My job is actually very similar to Mercedes as it happens, different companies, but we have the same sort of goals. With regards to my role, it is standards and regulations. My daily job requires me to be looking and reading and helping develop standards in a number of technical areas: artificial intelligence, quantum, general IT, cloud as well. And I work very closely in some of the ISO, IEC, JTC1, the IT standards group subcommittees and working groups to help develop those standards. But I also work with the national government and also with CEN and CENELEC and the European Commission, where they have legislation and standardization requirements which come out for legislation, and obviously industry has to deal with those and make sure that they all fit so we can use our products. So we work very heavily with both national and regional governments and regulators to work towards building standards which are usable, suitable, and of course, as we are talking about here, adoptable and people are going to use because they're quite important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony, and you will be able to provide us some case studies of adoption of standards for sure. Now we move it on to Elise.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, good evening, good everything to everyone. My name is Elise Owen, and I work for the US Environmental Protection Agency. Our agency is about an $8.8 billion US agency, which is relatively small. We have about 12,000 people, and our mission is to protect human health and the environment. And we do that in a lot of different ways. Of course, we write regulations. We also do research. We have a lot of partnership programs with the private sector, education, grants, work with the US states. So I kind of believe we punch above our weight here at EPA because we do have a lot of collaboration with others. And standards really weaves through all of our work. An agency standards executive is responsible for coordinating the agency's participation in standards. When we last counted, we have about 150 staff that sit on 40 different standards bodies. And then we have over 4,500 references to private sector standards in our regulations at the last time we counted. And so my role up until now has been to coordinate all of those activities and help facilitate the agency taking advantage of the amazing work that happens in the private sector and avoid recreating the wheel. I will note I'm transitioning to a new role within the agency, so I'm pleased to announce a colleague, Amanda Hoff, who will be taking over this role. She's on the webinar today, and I will include her contact information in the slides and hope folks have a chance to get to know her. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Elisa. And I'm glad that this webinar also serves as an occasion to introduce to this audience your new colleague that is taking over from you. And last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Giovanni Colot, that is the Public Relations Manager at CEN and CENELEC.
Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, even if virtually, to participate to this webinar. And indeed, as Mercedes said, yes, I work for CEN and CENELEC, which, as I suppose most of you already know, are two of the three official European standardization organizations. Together, the third one is ETSI. And CEN and CENELEC are two different organizations, but share the same secretariat based in Brussels. And we develop standards for Europe. CEN basically is focused on a broad range of sectors, while CENELEC focuses on electrotechnical standardization. So yes, we are like CEN and CENELEC are members-based organization, which means that our main motivating force is our members that are the national standardization bodies and electrotechnical committees in 34 countries of the single market, of the European single market. So as such, yes, our main responsibility is developing standards for Europe. And in this, we have a close relationship with the European Commission, the European institutions, which we will see later in my presentation. But we are independent bodies from the European institutions. That said, regarding my role, I am the Public Relations Manager, which means that I am in charge of external outreach, external communication, all activities that have to deal with communicating with the outside world, so media relations, website, social media, event management, and these kind of things. And I am part of the public policy and external affairs department of CEN and CENELEC. So it's really, we are the outward-looking face of this organization that develops standards. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and the rest will come during my presentation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to every one of you for this brief introduction. This will help also the audience that is hearing us today to understand, like the different perspectives, because as we said at the beginning, we are aiming at sharing, what are the communication strategies, what are stakeholder model engagements, and so on. And this is what each of the panelists will also allude to during the welcoming remarks or presentations that they have prepared. So now how we will move forward is that each of the panelists will, I believe everyone will use few slides to introduce their perspective on the topic of today's webinar. And as I said, after each presentation, we will have the possibility to take a couple of questions. So do not hesitate to submit your questions through the Q&A. And we will be glad, if we don't have the time to respond to all of them after each of the panelists, we will do that afterwards. So now I would like to get started and move it on to Elise, right? Elise, I'm gonna try to share your slides here. And once I have your slides on the screen, I will hand it over to you for your introduction. Can everybody see the screen and slides?
I can see it.
Amazing. So the floor is yours again, Elise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for displaying my slides. And it's great to talk to everybody. I'll just highlight on our intro slide, the name of my new colleague who's taking over is right there, Amanda Hoff, and our standards program contact information is included. I do hope that, we already have very close coordination with private sector standards bodies and other stakeholders in the US and even other countries, and hope that this webinar will prompt a deeper collaboration and communication. And I'll go to the next slide, please. Great. I already spoke a little bit about EPA, but I think when we're thinking about making standards useful, it's helpful to understand where a counterpart that's using those standards, which might be industry, it might be government, it might be somebody else, but it's helpful to know what's important to them. So I wanted to highlight a couple of things about EPA and what we're really focused on right now. Folks may have heard of the Powering the Great American Comeback Initiative here at the agency. And through that initiative, our administrator has laid out 5 pillars, all which really reflect U.S. priorities writ large. I will highlight Pillar 1, which is helping make sure that we have clean air, land, and water for every American. And at the same time, helping ensure that we have economic growth and competitiveness. So those are 2 goals that I think folks are expecting to exist simultaneously. And I personally believe that standards are a great path to achieving those dual goals. And I'll go to the next slide. When it comes to using standards and also participating in standards, as federal agencies, we always start at the top with the laws. There was a law in the US that was passed in the 1990s called the National Technology Transfer and Advancement Act, or NTTAA. Section 12D of that law specifically directs federal agencies to use what we call voluntary consensus standards unless they're inconsistent with applicable law or otherwise impractical. And if we choose not to use them and make our own standards instead, there's annual reporting where we need to report that to our Office of Management and Budget in Congress. And then we're also directed to consult with the VCS bodies, these are the private sector bodies, and to participate in standards development when it aligns with our authorities, priorities, budget, and mission. So as I mentioned at the top, we have about 150 staff right now that participate in standards development, and we use standards extensively through all of our work. Looking a level down from the law, there's a US policy called OMB Circular A119. And this is a policy that I think of like a cookbook. It tells agencies how to implement the law. So the law only has a few paragraphs. OMB A119 has 40 plus pages of guidance. And I personally find it very helpful. And I think our programs find it very helpful. So we refer to that a lot. And I think this whole idea of government using standards, it's really to help avoid recreating the wheel and be efficient. So in that spirit, I'm going to go to the next slides and actually take some screenshots from the circular just to kind of explain what we see as best practices for using standards. So there is a section in that OMB guidance document that essentially tells us what we should do and how we should consider using standards. I think the guidance really tells us to look at things on a case-by-case basis. So how EPA looks at standards and how we think about using them might be different than our Department of War or our Food and Drug Administration. So we're directed to take the realities of our mission, our impacted parties, our situation into account. And first and foremost, we're directed to look at whether the standard is effective. Is it going to meet our needs? And if so, great. There's other things to think about. If not, stop there, because if it doesn't meet our needs, why bother? And I will say that one of the best ways I think to help encourage standards that do meet our needs is when we're able to participate, shoulder to shoulder with industry, academia, and others on the standards development. And so that to me is the best possible situation. Resource realities and other constraints means that we can't do that in every case, but we certainly do try to participate wherever possible. Where we're not able to actually join a technical committee and sit with others on the standards development, it can be helpful. I've seen organizations reach out to our programs or reach out to me and say, hey, I know you're not on the committee, but we want to get your views on something that we're talking about, and kind of pull our expertise and our perspective in. And that can be a real good way when we're not able to actually participate, to kind of stay connected and hopefully if someone wants us to consider a standard, help guide that in a way that's going to be useful and meet the targets that we have. I'll go to the next slide. Some more guidance on what we need to think about then. Assuming the standard meets our needs, we're directed to think about the costs and benefits of implementing that standard. And there's language that specifically calls out the costs and benefits for small and medium-sized companies. And we also think about, where that standard is used in other places. So if a lot of other federal agencies already use that standard, then that helps avoid introducing new requirements. We can kind of tap into what's already happening. Or if others, either in the market or other governments, are already using a standard, that can be helpful to drive alignment and help protect human health and safety without unnecessary burden. Next slide. We also are asked to consider the process of the standard. So we think about whether or not it's a voluntary consensus standard. And that term, voluntary consensus standard, means that the standard was developed in a way that's open to everybody that wants to provide their input, balanced, so it has different viewpoints that are treated in a balanced way, where there's due process and appeals process and consensus. So we are encouraged to think that through and make sure that the standard was developed in an open and fair way. We're also strongly encouraged to think about international standards. And in our view in general, international standards means any standard that meets the WTO TBT criteria for international standards. So we don't necessarily look at where the organization is headquartered. We would look at how the standard was developed and whether it lines up with those requirements. We're directed to specifically think about whether there's barriers for people to get involved in the standard. Are there people who are left out, or people who aren't able to join that should be there? And then finally, and this is a hot topic, whether or not the standard is reasonably available. And that term, reasonably available, links back to our federal laws. And it essentially means that the people who are impacted by the standard should have a reasonable way to access the standard. And there's been a lot of discussion, I know, in the United States and probably other countries in the world about what that means in light of copyrighted standards documents that we use. And I'll go to the next slide to talk a little bit about that. So our OMB policy does talk about reasonable availability and gives us some additional guidance. And I'll start at the bottom of this slide and really highlight that the guidance right now tells us to respect copyright owners' interest in protecting its intellectual property. but also encourages us to work with the relevant standards developers to promote the availability of materials consistent with applicable law. And so that's something that, you know, every case where we might be regulating or doing a project or something else, every case can be a little bit different. So I will say that, you know, something that has been remarkably helpful is a lot of organizations are very willing to work with us. You know, we'll have an open conversation about some things that we're planning and say, hey, how can we meet this reasonable availability requirement? Can you help us? And some things that a lot of organizations have done that kind of make it a lot easier for us to use their standards. I'll look at the top that kind of aligns with our policy. A lot of standards bodies have been willing to make their standards available online with read-only access. So members of the public can see what they are. Maybe they can't print or search, but they can at least see what's in those documents so that when they're written into regulation, people can see them. Also, we're asked to consider, you know, the costs of the standards to the interested parties. So, you know, one regulation might be a lot more sensitive to that cost than another. So we're directed to really think that through and have a good idea of what we're doing. We're also directed to encourage how much the interested parties would need access to that standard to understand our regulation that's using that standard or our program that's using that standard. And finally, often we'll ask a standards developer to provide a summary. If they can't make the standard available through read access, sometimes they can provide a summary that explains the contents so that members of the public can kind of understand and digest what's being referenced in a regulation or other program. So I will say that, you know, having relationships with the standards communities, being able to kind of trust each other and talk openly and work through some of these issues, especially as they're emerging, things are changing, the courts are figuring out what this all means for all of us. So, you know, having that open dialogue with organizations in the US or organizations in other countries, I think can really remove barriers to using standards. And I'll wrap up my remarks there and pass back to Mercedes and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Elise, for these remarks. I think these showcase, you know, how government uses standards, but how you are used, I mean, how you participate in standards, how you are asked to use those standards. So I think that sets a bit the scene for the reminder of the session as well, and to hear more from standards development organizations, you know, how they facilitate that participation, how they facilitate the access to standards as well, that at the end might result in adoption of standards as well. So now I'll stop share my screen and I check that there is no questions. There is only one question related to the fact that whether the slides will be made available, and unless any of the panelists will have any issue with sharing the slides, we will make available both the slides plus the recording of the session. It is expected that both will be made available within 2 weeks time frame or even less. So I see that there are no other questions, I believe. So with that, I would like to get the discussion moving, and I believe that a nice segue from Elise's presentation will be to move it over to Katerina. And I know that Katerina would like to share her screen as she has also some slides to share with us. So I have already stopped sharing mine, and Katerina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let's see here about sharing. Okay. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, we can see it. If you can just go in, we are now like seeing like not the presenter's view, so you might need to swap.
You are not seeing the presenter's view?
No.
Hold on one second. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, let's see if that worked.
It works now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mercedes, and great comments from Elise. Hopefully I can touch on a few of the comments she made in her presentation. So I'm going to focus on how we utilize our members to drive adoption, and I'll get into a little bit of that throughout each slide. But again, as Mercedes mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, I'll be happy to stop and answer those. So every standards organization and its technical committees celebrate the publication of a standard. And honestly, I think we can all agree that they should, right? It's the culmination of a massive, massive effort. We are talking sometimes years of work, multiple rounds of balloting, and sometimes pretty intense negotiations among experts just to get consensus and clear the hurdles to publish a standard. But what technical committee members often learn after publication is that it's actually just the starting point. Some standards go on to become globally recognized benchmarks that are used every single day, and others are technically excellent, but barely see any adoption at all. So what makes the difference? I'm going to dive into what at ASTM we've learned over the last 128 years. If I can move these slides. Okay. So ASTM International is recognized by the World Trade Organization as an international standards developer. As you can see on the screen here, I've grabbed something from their website just in case anyone wasn't familiar, but these are the 6 principles from the technical barriers to trade agreement. And this is how the WTO defines what an international standard actually is. Our strict adherence to these 6 principles is what cements our status as a trusted, relevant international SDO, ensuring our standards drive global trade without barriers. And I think this touches on something that Elise mentioned as well, about access and lots of other things that were listed there in those 6 principles. So in our role as a globally recognized SDO, we have a pretty unique business model. ASTM as an organization doesn't actually keep standards experts on staff. I know some do, we do not. And we completely rely on volunteer members, as Giovanni noted in his remarks early, that we rely on our volunteer members from industry to do 2 things: to build the content and then eventually serve as industry advocates. This matters because we don't lobby for the use and adoption of our standards. What we do is publicize the purpose and availability of the standard, and then we work right alongside the members. We give them materials and information that they need so they can go back to their peers and advocate for why the standards are applicable, beneficial, and frankly necessary. And as we all know, standards adoption isn't linear, it's continuous. Once a need is identified, ASTM staff work with the technical committees to get all interested stakeholders engaged early in the development process. And I can tell you from experience, taking the time to do that outreach and ensure you have the right industry players involved doesn't just save you time during the development phase. It's actually creating user buy-in early on. When members feel like they're a part of the process, we know that they have a vested interest. They naturally want to create high-quality, technical sound standards that aren't overly prescriptive and are easy for the broader industry to adopt. Once an ASTM standard is published, we stay right there alongside the experts, and we issue things like press releases, we give educational presentations at conferences and events, and we constantly are seeking out user feedback to loop back into our revision process. It's a completely continuous cycle, and it's quite an undertaking, especially when you're managing 13,000 international standards. So let me just see here. So what does really drive adoption? This is my take on, from my opinion, of what I've boiled it down to. So first and foremost, standards that address an immediate burning need gain momentum incredibly fast. And more, I'm seeing the need for safety standards emerge as a leading factor. But it isn't just safety, right? We've heard about interoperability, quality, and of course, keeping pace with emerging technologies. Those are all taking a huge priority and ultimately determine if the standards get used. Second here, I'd suggest that Adoption improves dramatically when manufacturers, regulators, users, testing organizations, academics are all in the room early. Not because they all agree, of course. We know that doesn't happen, but because everyone gets the intended outcome. Personally, when we talk about getting the right stakeholders to the table, I found that industry associations play a critical role. Having a strong partnership with associations can really push usage forward and embed the standards into daily practice and guidance. And as the STO staff on this call know, the broader the participation, the easier international adoption becomes. ASTM's members span over 150 countries. We pride ourselves on having an online balloting system that's open to stakeholders 24/7. We also offer hybrid meeting options to bring that collaboration into a live format whenever we can. Ultimately, our goal is to meet members where they are. I did mention industry associations just a little bit ago, but a big part of the strategy that I personally use with my technical committees is to partner with these international industry associations and organizations. They often offer to host our meetings right alongside their events, and it's been a great way to bring in a much broader group of stakeholders into that conversation. And they're not necessarily members, which is fine and great as long as we're getting their feedback. Naturally, companies are always just going to ask, can we really adopt this? Can we really implement it? It's a constant area of focus for ASTM and our technology and product staff, as well as the technical members. Our committees aren't just focused on writing clear requirements. They're looking at reasonable testing, existing infrastructure, and realistic costs for organizations. At the same time, ASTM's digital technology team is working behind the scenes to make sure that standards access and delivery evolve right alongside industry needs and the latest tech. So as Elise mentioned, we work to provide access to standards that are referenced in law through our reading room, which is a read-only space where those can be found. And we'll continue to collaborate with industry and agencies as needed. Finally, and speaking of evolution, the most widely used standards never just sit still. They evolved, they're revised regularly to incorporate real-world user feedback and technical advancements. So all this is great, right? But serving over 90 different industries means understanding that each one operates a bit differently. And I did my opening remarks and told you about 5 different committees that I have, and they all represent different industries. So instead of just pushing one pathway, we educate our members and stakeholders on the multiple paths to adoption. Not every standard needs to become law. Plenty of them are just business as usual through everyday channels like contracts, insurance requirements, industry association guidance, certification programs, and internal company specs. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this technology adoption curve graphic, but I thought it was incredibly relevant to this discussion. You can apply this exact same concept to the consensus standards development process. If you think about it, you start with the initial industry stakeholders who bring forward the need. Those are your industry innovators. Then you immediately get other stakeholders who join the task group. Maybe they already have a similar best practice internally, so they quickly sign on and they are your early adopters. Next, the balloting happens. You hopefully garner more support and word on an impending industry standard starts spreading. And those folks that join in are your early majority. Because the consensus process is what it is, that early majority phase usually draws out additional feedback and maybe even some naysayers. Interestingly enough, they've often just been waiting to see what the others' input is and buy in first, and that's your late majority. And finally, after all that work, the standard gets published and you get feedback for the very first time from some of the impacted stakeholders. And in this graphic, you'll see that they've coined those folks laggards, although I don't really love that term. I think of them more as validation-focused adopters. Anyway, the point of this analogy is just to show that throughout the entire consensus process, you are knowingly or unknowingly building early buy-in and creating advocates for adoption. ASTM really does build consensus from day one. It's not a final checkbox in a step here. It's embedded into every single stage of what we do. Our members and stakeholders collaborate from the initial idea all the way through to publication, ensuring that they are shaping the outcome rather than just reviewing a finished piece of paper. As we know, in today's world, emerging technologies are here to stay. ASTM works to be a leader in the SDO community by engaging people early so we can help industries move faster and keep pace with innovation. Anyone with a direct and material interest can participate, regardless of their organization, country, or affiliation. In fact, a fun little fact, I kind of mentioned this earlier, that few people know is that ASTM invites non-members to participate in our task groups. And if they eventually want to join, our membership fee is intentionally kept low at $115, so the cost isn't a barrier to entry. Our committee structures are specifically designed so that no single interest category can dominate the process. All members are classified at both the main and subcommittee levels, which is where our voting happens, to ensure balanced participation and make sure everyone can contribute their expertise. Every stage gives you a chance to flag concerns, suggest improvements, and build toward that consensus before we publish. With members spanning 150 countries, our goal remains getting all the relevant experts at the table. And at the end of the day, our standards are living documents. We deliver access through our flagship product called Compass. It's a subscription that lets users view, download, print, make annotations, compare updates to historical versions, and even integrate internal corporate comments right into the documents. Standards can undergo a revision at any time. We have a baseline requirement that they are reviewed within 5 years of the initial publication, and then they have to be reballoted or reapproved before the end of the 8th year. And I'll just leave you with a couple thoughts that standards adoption is a journey. And like I said, publication is really just the beginning. I think we all have gotten that from the comments so far. True adoption depends on the engagement and collaboration long before the document is finished, and standards stay credible because they continue to evolve alongside technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina, also for this presentation and for sharing with us what, from your perspective, are some of the drivers for the successful adoption, but also what are the paths for adoption. As you were pointing out, the trigger, right? It might be different for different industries, different sectors, and I think Tony will definitely, choose some of these, like what can be the triggers from an industry point of view. But before going on to Tony, and I see that there is a question in the Q&A, but I would like to take that question probably as it is a question addressed to the panel once we have the welcoming remarks by everyone. And I would like to move from ASTM to another standards development organization. And for that, I'll give the floor to Giovanni from CEN and CENELEC.
Yes. Hello, Mercedes. Thanks for giving me the floor. I will also share a few slides. So just give me 1 second that I try to see if it works as it should.
And while Giovanni is pulling up his slides, please do not hesitate to continue introducing your questions in the Q&A panel. And as I said, depending on the question, if it is directly addressed to the speaker, we can take it after the presentation, or otherwise we will get back to those questions after the speakers made their introductory remarks. So, Giovanni, the floor is yours. The problem is I can personally
I'm muted.
not
You can hear me, right?
now I can hear
Okay,
you.
perfect.
Yes.
And you can also see the slides. So everything worked
Yes.
well. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you, Mercedes. And thank you, Katerina, for the very interesting presentation. You will see that in my presentation, I think some of the things I'm going to say go in the same direction, because I think indeed the experience as standards developing organizations are quite similar. So it's very good to have a bit more of that discussion afterwards, maybe. But basically, indeed, as I said earlier, I'm here in presentation of CEN and CENELEC. CEN and CENELEC are 2 of the official European standardization bodies. And so the focus of my short presentation will be on providing a European angle to the discussion we're having now. So basically, basically what I'm going to show towards in the next slides and in the next few minutes of my intervention is something that has already been named, actually, like something that's already been said by many people. The fact that we all agree and we all know that standards create value only when they are used. Like there's no value in having a document that is there, written well, developed in a good way with a lot of consensus, and nobody has access to it. This is an important understanding and an important value for the European standardization system. And indeed, for us, adoption is not an afterthought, but I would say it is embedded in how European standards are developed, adopted, and implemented. In particular, what we can see, what we experience as CEN and CENELEC, and here it's where probably there is some overlap with also ASTM's experience that Caterina just showed us. But we can identify 4 main drivers that are complementary for the adoption of standards at the European level. So we have indeed the market relevance. So standards are adopted when they solve real problems. Secondly, standards are adopted when there is ownership from stakeholders, so their users participate in development. There is also an important part, which is that some standards support policy objectives. They're useful to develop strategic and policy objectives, and so that's why also they're adopted. And then fourth of all, standards are adopted if users know they exist and know how to use them. In our experience, adoption is strongest when all 4 these criteria are present, and this is what we are working on towards as CEN and CENELEC to achieve. Basically, we start with the easy thing, with I would say a more structural driver, which I'm sure most of you are already aware of, but it's good to communicate. Let's say the superpower of European standards, or a very peculiar characteristic of European standards, is that one European standard is applicable all across the single market and European economic area. So it means that one European standard, once approved, is translated into the different national markets of the European economic area as 34 identical national standards. And what's more important is that all conflicting national standards must be withdrawn. So this is a big advantage for somebody, for a company, for a user using a European standard, because it gives by default access to the single market, which is more than 600 million consumers. So that's really, I would say, a structural, a built-in condition. A second element that is important that we saw in the initial slide is that European standards can be used, and they're also widely used, to support policy objectives. This happens in particular thanks to a specific type of standards, which are the harmonized standards, which is, I won't delve too much into the specificity of this, but basically a harmonized standard is a European standard that is cited in the official journal of the European Union. And once this process happens, it allows presumption of conformity with European legislation. Standards per se remain voluntary, but according to this process, a user, a company, an entity, an authority can prove that they respect the EU legislation by applying the standard. And this, as you say, like as you see here, like we have in our portfolio around 3,500 harmonized standards, which is 13-14% of the total. So we have a lot more standards that are not harmonized, but this is an important reason of why people and users implement European standards. But then this is also something that has emerged already before. Publication is just one element of many. And a big part of the adoption starts before publication. And this is really built in into how standards are made. Because the people who ultimately use standards, so the industry, SMEs, consumers, stakeholders, and more, many more, can and are invited to contribute to making standards, and this happens at the European level through the national delegation principle, which means that experts come to us at CEN and CENELEC through the national members. And we believe and we are aware, and this is actually like recognized by many of our stakeholders, that people are far more likely to trust and implement standards when they have helped shape them. And when the final results reflect practical needs, reflect the consensus of people discussing. I mean, Caterina has already explained a bit the process, so I won't give too many details about that. But this is an important part of our work as CEN and CENELEC, and this is really an important value of what we do. By the way, we also have a specific attention to engaging researchers and innovators. And here in the slide, you see some examples. But for example, we have the Standards Plus Innovation Awards, through which we award researchers and innovators. The idea is really to engage researchers and innovators early in the process to get them to standardize and to understand how standardizing their researches can help access the market. But so we said some adoption criteria are structural, because that's how, let's say, Europe works and our system works. There is a big part of adoption that starts before publication, but then there is also an important part of adoption which comes after publication. And this consists, let's say, of a whole galaxy of actions at different levels that consist of helping users implement standards. Users need support maybe to understand the relevance, to understand how they can implement standards. So yes, publication, once again, is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of the implementation. In this context, we have found very important elements like trainings, guidance material, practical examples, capacity building activities across different areas. Here you can see some examples again, but just two I would like to mention very quickly. One is, for example, the CEN workshop agreements. CEN workshop agreements are a more agile and inclusive route to standardization that can allow to bring into the standardization system fast-moving innovation or technologies that are not yet developed. And we saw they're very effective to respond to specific stakeholders like innovators or technologists who need greater flexibility, broader participation. And secondly, also this applies specifically to SMEs, which normally don't have the resources or don't have the time to focus on understanding how a standard can help them or how they can implement a standard. So for example, as directly as CEN and CENELEC or through our members, we have some, tools like this SME compatibility tools, or we provide mentoring, implementation examples. Like there are some, there are some tools we have and we can come up with to support SMEs to implement standards. And then, of course, here, this is what is really close to my bread and butter, what I'm doing every day. There is, of course, an important role of communication, which consists of building awareness, making people aware of the fact that standards exist and what their role is. Here, CEN and CENELEC we don't sell standards directly, so really our job is not to do marketing, to push people to lobby, as Caterina said earlier. Here, what we really do is we help user discover that there is a standard, how it it helps address their needs, how it helps address policy needs. And really, for example, on this, we have a very specific series on our website that you can have a look at after once you receive the slides, where once a month we promote one specific standard, and we really don't focus on its technicalities. So what does the standard say? But we try to focus on what it does, why it matters, why it is important, and how it can be used. And we saw that this is like really this series is it's quite a successful communication product we have. This is something that I can mention later if there is interest, maybe. But just to conclude my intervention, so this is a bit the scenario. We have these four main criteria for adoptions, or like adoption drivers. What we see and what we expect as CEN and CENELEC is that the future challenge for a body like us and standardization bodies mainly, but generally talking from the European perspective, is not simply producing more standards or producing better standards and increasing our production. That stays, of course. But what is becoming more and more important is helping users move more rapidly from publication to implementation, is to foster implementation and make sure that people can get from standards the impact they want. This means, of course, investing in awareness raising, in education, in implementation support, continuous engagement, but this is important to ensure the standards can deploy their full value. So that's a bit it for the moment. Thank you very much for your attention. And of course, if there are questions now or later, I'm happy to reply to them.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. I see that there are no questions for the time being, other than people agree that you have all made very good presentations and will be happy to get access to them. But I think you're sharing as well, Giovanni, you highlighted how important it is a stakeholder participation to drive adoption, but you touch upon as well on the relevance of like communication as well, to raise awareness after the standards are published, and once again to drive that adoption. So we have heard different perspectives starting from government and a couple of standards development organizations. So I believe that we are clearly missing the voice of the industry here. And that's why I will hand it over now to Tony.
Thank you very much. So I will just find my slides. There's not many of them, you'll be glad to hear, but I've got to find them.
It's coming, we have it.
Okay, is that good? That's the right screen, is it?
That's right screen.
Okay, good stuff. Right. So yes, just an intro slide there. Yes, you'll be glad to hear I've only got 2 slides, so it might take a while, but we could talk about this for a long time. But just to sort of set the scene, my experience is very much from initiation of standards, even before standards developed, all the way through to adoption and use of standards. So I'm going to try and make this more aligned with the adoption process and the use of standards if I can, but there are elements in here which quite clearly fit in at the early stages, and even as in an industry stakeholder who's perhaps wanted to use these, our interest starts even before it's even been agreed. So there's lots to this, and this might generate some more questions, but I will also say a lot of what has been said already you may hear or get some similar threads coming through in what I'm about to say. So lots of words on this screen, and split into 2 parts. The top half is pre-development of standards, and the lower part is the post-development of standards. So one is getting it to the point of publication, and the second half is what then. So as I said, even before we get to publication of a standard and the adoption of it, we have to have a good reason to get this done. And we would ask lots of questions. These are only some of the questions which we as a stakeholder would ask, even at the early stages. So you start out there with what could be standardized and what should be standardized. They're actually very important questions, the should especially. And there's one on here, next one down actually. What problem are we trying to address? That is something which has already been mentioned. If we're not trying to address a problem, then it begs the question, well, why are we even creating a standard in it? What's this gonna do? Who's this gonna help? If there is a problem which we can identify, then it comes on to the next one, which is broad industry desire to get involved. It may be that there is a big problem, but not many people are interested in trying to solve it. There's lots of questions there with relation to that. And then it comes on to some more fundamental ones about us as an organization, or any organization. What will give impact both to us and our customers? If we're just going to adopt a standard because we can, how is that going to help us? What's going to be the long-term gain of doing that? And also, the final one there, could this in the long term give us some competitive advantage? Of course, we have to consider those kind of things. If there is value in that to potentially give us some competitive advantage, and it is something which I'll touch on possibly now and possibly later on. In relation to that, there's areas which, if people can get on board early enough, they can help shape things. They can help align their own business with various things to actually effectively give them a step up on the ladder, if you want to use that analogy. So that's even before we get going. All those questions need to be considered. But then when you come to agreement of it, and ultimately then at the end of it, the adoption, there's more to deal with. It was mentioned by Elise at the beginning, the top-down approach. So if we have a legislative application of something which standards are the result of, then we possibly have to consider it. But then we also have to consider other areas like the customer value. What is it to the customer of ours? Is this going to be helpful to them? And therefore, should we adopt it? Could we adopt it? But we also have the technology adoption and innovation, which is something which wouldn't fall necessarily under the legislative approach, but not even the customer value either. This is more about innovation. And if we adopt a standard, or if we design, build, and develop and publish a standard, and it's broad enough and useful enough to many out there, it's not necessarily the customers, but other businesses, SMEs, other industry stakeholders. They might want to use this because it's of good value. And I'll give a specific example here of things like USB. We all know and love USB as it's in its current form, and probably in its previous forms as well. That is basically just a technology which somebody thought it was a good idea to standardize. It became the de facto standard and has subsequently gone from strength to strength. That is a prime example of just industry de facto standards which people have loved and got on board with. And the fact that the standards are there and published means that anybody can look at the specifications of the USB standard and adopt it themselves and apply it to their own products. So there's great value in all of those areas. Legislative in as much as it comes down from the top, the technology adoption, which is effectively the bottom up, and sometimes that can actually meet in the middle with the legislation as well, and then the customer aspects too. So lots of those points in the bottom half there is about the adoption. I mentioned the legislation, the industry drive, opens the door to innovation. And the other point on here, which is in bold, is this something our customers really want? One of the things, and I mentioned about competitive advantage, is that if we as an organization can cite something somewhere to say that we actually adopt this, use this, are certified against something, whatever it might be, and I'm going to use some labels now which you may be familiar with. ISO 9000 ISO 14000, and specifically from my interest, which is artificial intelligence, ISO 42001, which is the management system standard for artificial intelligence, the international standard, which is really quite useful. So if we as an organization have adopted 42001 for artificial intelligence, if we have been certified against it, we are basically saying that whatever is in that document, we are ticking the box for, so that people out there in the industry know that we are following a particular model. We have got a framework in place. Our organization has a certain set of characteristics and benchmarks which we follow, procedures and so on. So people will have and can have some assurance that if they are coming to us as an organization and they need those assurances, we can cite that and say in 42001 we've been certified for it, and so they will have be able to reference 42001 as a benchmark, and everybody knows where they stand. So that can give you a competitive advantage. Now, I know 42001 at the moment is still relatively early days, whereas 9001 is many years old. That's the quality management standard. But nevertheless, in the world of artificial intelligence, 42001 is a big deal, and it was referenced frequently during the course of last year when it was published, and it's been adopted, and people are certified to left, right, and centre because it is felt to be a very good and very valuable document, which gives organisations that box which they can tick effectively. I'm using kind of simplistic terms here, but a box to tick to say this is what we have done, this is where we stand, and this is what we believe and the process which we follow. My only other slide here, just moving on, comes back to some of the fundamentals which I believe are important in the adoption of standards. The first one there, the justification. It goes back to the point of, is there a need here? What's the problem which we're trying to fix? Is there a problem at all? And really the justification behind the initiation and the development of a standard needs to be, as it says there, rock solid. If it's just smoke and mirrors because it's somebody's pet idea and they think, oh, I like this, I think it's a good idea, therefore I'm going to do it, the adoption is perhaps, and this kind of thing has been mentioned already, perhaps not going to be very high, and in which case, if the adoption is not very high, then the value of it is going to be quite low potentially. So anybody can standardize or write a standard on a widget which they've developed, but it may not be of any use to anybody if it's not really thought about carefully. So we do have to think about the justification very carefully before we agree to some of these standards. And ultimately, if the justification is strong and there's a need, and this of course means getting the buy-in by both industry and the experts and the standards organizations, and of course the national committees and national bodies, it requires everybody to get on board with a good idea and not just alluding to something which is hidden behind, as it says there, smoke and mirrors. The development, so again, and this has been mentioned, we need the input from many people, not just one expert with a good idea trying to create something which may or may not be useful. If there is wide industry interest in the development of it, and I will use again 42001 as an example of that, that had input from across the globe, and as a result, it got a lot of airtime. It has become quite a valuable standard. And that's during the development phase. As long as we can get industry and the experts involved in that, then during that phase, then it could potentially be a worthwhile standard. And the final point there, technology readiness, of course, and this comes back to the kind of the justification as well. Is what we're trying to do at the right time? Is it addressing? Is it responding to market needs? If this is something again that's not responding to market needs, then you have to question about whether it will respond to market needs at any point in the future. And the quote I often use, even before we go to putting forward an idea, the quote by, as it says there, Dr. Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum in the Jurassic Park film, people are so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think whether they should. And this goes back to what could we standardize and what should we standardize, and what we should standardize is those which we have justified, which we have got industry input for, and other stakeholder engagement as well, to the point that it gets to publication with a valuable quality standard, but also can be adopted because we've already seen that there is market desire to go forward and pick it up. So with that, there's a lot of things in there to unpick, but I'll stop there in the interest of time and hand back to you, Mercedes.
Thank you so much, Tony. I think it was a good way, like to kind of close on these opening remarks with the relevance and the importance of asking ourselves the question at the very beginning. So the pre-development stage that you were mentioning on what is the problem that we are trying to solve, or what is the market need that we are trying to address, that this will at the end drive that standards adoption. So thank you very much to all of you for this. I see that now we have triggered, or you have triggered with your presentations, a few questions. And I see that the first one that we have here is it talks about the coordination and the collaboration among the standardization organizations. So the question itself is, how might recent geopolitical developments increase the need for deeper collaboration and coordination among global standardization organizations? So I think this question can be easily answered by either Caterina from ASTM or Giovanni. I think that they can talk about the relevance or how standards development organizations also collaborate with each other. So I will hand it over, like the first one that would like to get this question answered.
Okay, I think I can go ahead. Thank you. Yes, indeed, it's a very interesting and very important question. And indeed, I think that in a few words, indeed, there is a more fragmented geopolitical ecosystem. Definitely, that's happening. But international standards are really in this context, international standards and standards in general are one of the few instruments that can help push the other way. So really the value of shared standards, international standards, of this type of agreements, I think at the moment goes up, and it's even more important. Then yes, cooperation between an organization is key, as its standards can still allow to maintain international coordination and improve interoperability. And on the one hand, like normally what we see, at least at the European level, is that standard used to be like only technical, and that for some extent it was, and it's always been a bit their strength, in the sense that it's something that it's very technical and it's not put under discussion that much. Now they're becoming a bit more political, but I still think they have a very fundamental value, and so we should keep up and increase relationships and increase connections between the different levels: national, European, international body, between international standardization bodies. And that requires also a reflection on our side. I'm thinking about CEN and CENELEC, so how to include voices and how to include stakeholders that we haven't included until now. But definitely, I think standards can show the way on how to keep together and how to keep common rules strong, even in a moment in which they're stretched all around.
Yeah,
Giovanni, I don't know, Caterina, if you want to add something.
Sure. I just echo that. I completely agree with Giovanni that it increases, these developments increase the need for international standards. One thing I know from my specific technical groups and working with them is that no single group has all the answers or all the experts, right? So we really do rely on this global cooperation with one another. It helps not only just to reduce the duplication, but accelerate the development of the standards, keep pace with innovation, and then, ultimately have a published standard that can be trusted So I think, it just increases the need for international standards.
Exactly, indeed. You alluded now, Katerina, to the fact that the resources are limited, right? And we often discuss about the lack of experts, etc. So this collaboration also addresses or avoids duplication of efforts across the different standards development organizations. So we have another question that is slightly different. It's more about the AI and how AI will change, right, the standards development, but also standards adoption. So the question it is about, it comes from a standards user who keeps wondering about the future of standards in the age of AI. So maybe you are able to share, right? The question is, how are we poised to support the use as well as the adoption of standards when users are now trying turning to artificial intelligence solution as one of the first solutions. So maybe here again, right, this question goes more into Katerina or Giovanni, but all the others can jump in and reflect on how they see the AI affecting the development adoption of standards.
Yep.
Do you want to take it, Katrina?
Sure, I'll go first this time, Giovanni. So, this is AI is something that ASTM is really looking into in terms of how we can implement something into our systems that we currently have, our digital technology. But in general, I don't think that AI will replace standards, right? My personal opinion is just that you need trusted documents and standards that can be utilized, and this helps differentiate the standards that are developed through the consensus process, help differentiate from content you might be getting from an unverified source. So that's kind of how I look at it. And like I said, the important part will be for us to implement it into our users' workflows, and we're still working on that internally. So I'll be really interested to see how that evolves for our organization.
Thank you. And we have now a question that is, I believe, reflecting on Tony's presentation, and it comes from another Tony. So we have discussed about the need, right, to ask the right questions before we start developing a standard on whether, what is the problem that tries to solve or the market need. And so the question in relation to that is how to manage the situation of active markets plus multiple solutions plus good standards being ready at the right time, because that's another thing, right? We have heard from the presentation from Giovanni or even Elise how standards also support the implementation of legislation or policies. So maybe Tony, you want to take this one?
Okay, so let me start. There might be some other comments which others make. I'm just looking for some notes here. They're over there. Okay. So this is quite a complicated question. Sorry, it's a simple question, but quite a complicated answer. Finding that sweet spot in the middle is not easy, not by a long way. If you have a new technology, then the likelihood of requiring a standard to support it, and unless it's being pushed from a legislative perspective, the requirements of the standard are probably quite low. So any standard which is developed, it's definitely going to be a bottom up. It's going to be somebody who thinks it's a good idea, unless it's foreseen that there is a problem, and again, addressing a problem which is there. By the time we see problems, technology is usually established to a point where it could be out there in the consumer world. I use that term very broadly. That can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But if there's just a research project, then somebody finding a problem in there and at the same time trying to standardize it would probably be ill-conceived. I think it was Katerina who posted a chart which was a sort of curve in the middle. That would be a good reference point. to trying to understand the time frame for trying to do standardization as a starting point. But we should also think about things like standardization readiness levels. There's various readiness levels which we can use. And I know the US has got an organization there who's done something with SRLs in the past, and they're doing something at the moment with SRLs. And that would help enormously in identifying, through a technology perspective, at what point is it in relation to, is it ready, or from the point of view of actually being able to standardize. Because if you've got a level 3 technology, it probably isn't ready to standardize. There's lots of information about SRLs about which you can read more into. But I would also point towards the legislative approach. Obviously, we have things like the European Commission who puts things out like the AI Act and the Data Act and so many other acts to which, from a standardization perspective, we have to accommodate. But there are occasions where both standards organizations and legislators work, or policymakers work together. And I can cite an example of 9868, which was design, development, and use of biometric identification systems, which was joint developed effectively last year by JTC1, ST37, and the European Commission. It was done specifically to see if there was a way to tie both the development of a standard together with the processing of legislation in the European Union, and it worked. But that was an agreement between the two structures, between the two organizations, and it worked quite well. So clearly there was a problem. It was going to be addressed partly by legislation in the European Union, and the standards were able to respond to it at that time. So they actually fitted very well together. And that's all about collaboration, communication, and openness and transparency. So we have to accommodate those things as well. But going back to the original question, I believe, to answer the question specifically, standardization readiness levels, technology readiness levels, and various curves to try and chart where we are and identify the problems and how far they are down the line. And I'll stop there, let somebody else have a go.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tony, to address that. I agree with you. That is a rather complex, question to try to answer in a short way. But in the interest of time, I would like to also post another question to the panelists that has been posted on the chat. It comes from a professor at the university, and in the introduction, it speaks about how difficult it is to engage young professionals and students into standards, right? So the question is, where in the standards development life cycle should we or can we consider those brand new to a subject, as it can be students or young professionals, and the underpinning standards related to their discipline, and shares the reflection that finds it especially important as it relates to the professional aspirations of young people. So maybe, Giovanni or Elise can speak to this.
I'm happy to take a crack, Giovanni, and then pass it to you. I think this question of how do we engage young people is something that we have a lot of experience in, because it's similar to how do you engage people that maybe are new to standards. I'm seeing standards expand well past technical disciplines and technical topics, and that requires a lot of new stakeholders, whether it's industry leadership, government leadership, students, tribes, and indigenous people. There's so many new communities that are being touched. And I've learned that in 20 years working on standards, I've learned a new language, and it's standardese, and we all speak it. And I think we speak it without realizing it a lot of times. And it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to communicate ideas in a way that anyone can understand. We have so many concepts shared among us in this amazing community that we can talk to each other and know exactly what we're saying. And I've kind of hit this brick wall, whether it's talking to young people, talking to new staff at our agency, talking to leaders that aren't standards geeks. They don't know what we're talking about. And so I'm going to make the point that working on that is probably the single most important thing we can do. Standards speak for themselves. They're amazing. What we do is mind-boggling. We crowdsource, we bring the best ideas in the world together. It's inspirational, but I think sometimes we get in our own way, kind of putting a layer of standards geekiness on the top and not letting people see what we're really up to and how important it is. So my call to action on that question and engaging all new stakeholders is, figure out what we're going to say, find an 8th grader, find a 12-year-old, tell them, see if they understand what we're talking about, and if not, work on it and get better. And I think that's a really, really important thing that we can all work on in engaging the next generation as well as new communities. And I'll stop there. Maybe Giovanni has other perspectives to add.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I will just take a few seconds just to say that, yes, indeed, I agree with what Elisa said. Also, like one of the issues we're experiencing at the European level is that the standardization is a very closed niche environment, and so most of the experts that participate in that are old, but I'm not talking about old from an age perspective, but like people who've been working in standardization forever, and it's very difficult to get new forces, new minds, which can be young students, but it can also be people who have never participated in standardization, and it's really not a matter of age here, it's a matter of gaining new perspectives. It's difficult, but I agree with the idea that already raising awareness, already talking to people and trying to explain what we do and trying to explain what standards are is good. This is what we're trying to do. You will see in the presentation when we will share it. At CEN and CENELEC, we have this series of interviews to young professionals in standardization, where we really ask them questions and we ask them their stories of how they ended up participating in standards. And there really you have a crazy variety of people. Like some of them discovered standards through the university, some of them did some research as part of a PhD, and now they became part of a TC. Some of them are parts of TC, like I guess Mercedes as well here. So it's really, there's really a wide variety, but already asking people to share what they think and being there and talking to them is already a good way. Then of course it's challenging. I know that in Luxembourg they have a master that includes education on standardization. I know that not all universities can set up a course dedicated to standardization, but maybe they can invite one representative of the national standardization body for half an hour to explain what a standard is, and then maybe magic happens.
Thank you so much to all of you. I was about to challenge Tony before when we were like 2 minutes to reach the end of the webinar to respond to one of the questions that has been posted on the Q&A. But unfortunately, of course, we didn't have time to cover these 2 remaining questions that were posted there. But I'm really glad that we had the time to both share some time where like different panelists share their perspectives, but we were also having the time to answer to some of the questions in live. So I want to first thank all my panelists for making this such an interesting, I hope, at least for me, panel session. I see that there has been a great interest on having the slides, so I will check with you, and if those can be shared, I will definitely ensure that the slides and the recording are both made available. And for everyone that joined, we had about 100 participants, and now we are already running a bit out of time, of course, but I wanted to also thank you for participating. I wanted to thank you for the questions that you have submitted, and I really hope that you find this session of interest. So thank you very much to everyone. And for me, it has been a pleasure to moderate this panel session. So without any further ado, I would like to close this session. I hope that you have a nice rest of your day, wherever you are, and let's keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.